You're the best dad ever.
Morning, Bridgetown. If you've been here for a while, you've probably heard me or my son Josh preach before. If you're new here, don't worry, the better preachers will be back next week. Since it's Father's Day, James asked if Josh and I would want to do today's message together. We jumped at that opportunity, especially since it's about one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Josh and I, we were considering preaching every other word, but we decided it'd probably be better if he spoke first and then let me finish the sermon. I'm going to read the passage for today before he comes out. It's from Mark chapter 9, if you have your Bibles with you. Hopefully your Bibles aren't with me. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all of the crowd, when they saw him, they were greatly amazed, and they ran up and greeted him. And they asked him, "What are you arguing with them about?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And when he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And they brought him the boy, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood, and has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing terribly, it came out. And the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. When he had entered the house, the disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer."
Hello, Bridgetown, and happy Father's Day. Why do we celebrate Father's Day? Is it to give them recognition for what they've done? For raising us, they've changed our diapers, and because fathers are supposed to be great. I trust my dad, and I know he can keep me safe. Dads are teachers, they're leaders, they're there for you. Let's give a hand for fathers. All right, fathers are supposed to be somebody that you can trust, and I know that I trust my dad because he will always be there for me. Okay, you might be wondering why I'm saying how great dads are. Partly because my dad bribed me to, but mostly because our story is about another caring dad that was just trying to do his best for his child, like fathers are supposed to do. He brought his son to Jesus because the boy had an evil spirit in him, and no one else could help him. The disciples weren't able to hear the boy, so the man had to go to Jesus directly. Later, when the disciples asked him why they couldn't do it, Jesus responded to him and said it was because it required prayer. The boy was eventually healed, but who prayed? Not the disciples. And the Bible doesn't show Jesus or anyone else praying there. So it must have been the father when he said, I believe, help my unbelief. The dad in this story came to Jesus to heal his son. And in the end, it was his prayer that allowed his son to be healed. When the dad said, I believe, help my unbelief, what does that even mean? He is saying, yes, I trust you, but help the part of me that is doubting. Help the part of me that wavers. Some people think that you either have faith or you don't. All or nothing. But I think faith is more like a spectrum. Faith isn't black or white. It isn't on or off. It's something that grows like a seed. It is something that you may have a lot of or a little of, but everyone has some amount of faith. The most important question is, what do you put your faith in? Some people may say that they don't have faith in anything at all, but that can't be true. Faith is allowing yourself to depend on someone or something, even if you don't see or comprehend the whole picture. Riding on an airplane takes faith because most of the signs behind our airplane, because most people don't know all the science behind how airplanes work. But I trust that an airplane will get me from here to there. Or taking medicine. I don't even know the beginning of how it works, but I know that it'll help me when I'm sick and it'll make me feel better. Those are all kind of faiths. Or even something like the Cincinnati Reds. Even though they haven't won a playoff game in almost 30 years, I still have faith that they can get all the way to the World Series. Hopefully. Your faith may be small, but everyone has faith in one form or another. I've talked a lot about faith, but what is faith? Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That chapter goes on to talk about other heroes of faith, including another father and son, Abraham and Isaac. Abraham had faith that God would keep his promise to give him a son, even though he and his wife were too old to have kids. And later, he trusted God with the life of his son when they were called to go up to the mountain. Abraham had to have faith and trust what God wanted him to do. And I'm sure it didn't make sense to Abraham at the time, but he had faith, and things worked out. I know at times that I don't always trust in God as much as I should, or times where I'm not exactly sure how he's working in my life. But I still worship him. I will still go to my church because I have faith. I trust him. I trust that he will work all things out for my good. It's not a question if you have faith. Everyone has faith. The question is, what are you putting your faith in?
Thank you very much, Josh. I'm definitely a proud father here today. I'm sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. Those might be the scariest words that you ever hear, and they're some of the hardest words to tell someone. As a nurse working in the ICUs for most of the past decade, I've had to hear and say that phrase more often than I would like. The science of medicine has come a long way in the last 2,000 years. We have machines that will pump your blood, machines that will filter your blood. They'll breathe for you, regulate your temperature, and more types of tubes and wires than you can possibly imagine. But sometimes we still have to say, I'm sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. I wonder how many times the father of that boy heard those words or something like it. I'm sorry, but there's nothing else we can do for you. I wrote that introduction to this sermon about a month ago, not realizing that I would have to be having that same conversation this past week with a patient and her family. But this conversation, it was a little different than most of the other ones that I've had. This person, they were obviously a follower of Jesus. There were still tears, but she was at peace with the situation. I got to be in the room with her as her pastor prayed with her, while her family held her hand and told stories. and I got to help keep her comfortable during that time. It made me want to revise the focus of my message a little bit today. Sometimes Jesus moves the mountain, and sometimes he helps you climb it. 2,000 years ago, they didn't have the same tubes and wires and medications and machines that we have today. But I wonder how many times the Father heard that phrase, "I'm sorry, there's nothing else we can do for you." I wonder how many times the Father heard something like that. How many doctors and healers and priests had told him those words, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing else that we can do." And I'm sure every time he heard those words, he fell a little bit deeper into despair. You see, every time you hear a no, it gets a little bit harder to believe in a yes. And every time you have a loss, it's a little bit harder to hope for a win. How much time and money and miles and tears had he spent trying to get his son the help that he so desperately needed? This boy had a life-threatening illness. The father seems to be describing some form of epilepsy resulting in what's known as clonic-tonic or grand mal seizures. There's several types of epilepsy, which are all serious, but this is probably the most familiar to people and the most dangerous. It causes loss of consciousness and violent muscle contractions. On its own, it can be life-threatening just due to the risk for aspiration or physical trauma. But to make things worse, the father says that there's a demon that often triggers this reaction when he's near fire or water. And that not only increases the risk to the boy, but also to anyone who tries to help him. So naturally, like a good parent, this father tries everything he can to help his son. But to this point, nothing has worked. This boy and his family feel stuck in the valley of the shadow of death, waiting for the day that they can't get to him in time, where he drowns or is burned too badly or finally succumbs to some trauma. And every time somebody tells them, "I'm sorry, there's nothing else we can do," the valley feels a little deeper, a little darker, and a little more hopeless. But one day, the father hears of a traveling rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth. But he's not like the other teachers and doctors and healers. They say he has the power to heal the sick, the lame, the deaf, the blind, to feed multitudes, and even to cast out demons. And the father thinks, maybe, finally, somebody can help my boy. So he goes to track down this Jesus, but he's nowhere to be found. However, he does find 9 of Jesus' disciples, so he talks to them instead. "I was told that Jesus could perform miracles and even cast out demons. My son has been sick and tormented for years. Can you help me? Can you tell me where Jesus is?" Well, the big cheese isn't here, but good news. Back in chapter 6, he gave us the authority to cast out demons. Last time he sent us out in pairs to teach and to heal, but there's 9 of us here, so we definitely got you covered. After giving it an initial go, they are unsuccessful in healing the boy. So the 9 huddle up and come up with plan B. I can only imagine what they would have tried to come up with. What should we do now? We already promised the guy that we would do it. Remember that time Jesus rubbed some dirt on that blind guy? Let's try that. Oh, that didn't work. That one lady, she was healed when she touched his robe. Has anybody seen one of Jesus' socks? Oh, no, he's wearing both of them. Dang it. That didn't work. Andrew speaks up. There was that one miracle where he told Peter to throw the nets off the other side of the boat. What is it with you and fishing? We don't have a boat or nets here. None of that's going to help. Judas is standing off like, shouldn't we be charging those guys some money? Thomas is off to the side shaking his head. I doubt any of this is going to work. While all this is going on, the crowd of onlookers is growing, including the teachers of the law, who are some of Jesus' some of Jesus' biggest critics. They are also referred to as scribes in some translations. The scribes and the Pharisees, they like the status quo. In the status quo, they're highly respected and they get to look down on everybody else. In fact, Jesus says about them, do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do. For they don't practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Needless to say, they were not big fans of Jesus. They would take every opportunity to make Jesus and his disciples look bad. They would often try to trap him with some sort of question. Which is the greatest commandment? Should we really pay taxes to our enemy Rome? Whose sin caused this man to be disabled? If a woman was widowed several times, who would she be married to in heaven? The modern equivalent might be, can God make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? I don't think they were genuinely looking for answers. I think they were trying to trick Jesus with their words, but they were never successful. Eventually, the scribes and Pharisees would come to realize that Jesus was even more quick-witted than they were, and they would stop testing him. But Jesus wasn't here at the moment, just 9 of his disciples, so the scribes tried to make his followers look bad instead. We don't know exactly what they said, but we can have some idea based on other things that they've said to Jesus and his disciples in the past. I'm sure they were very excited when they saw that the 9 couldn't perform the miracle that they had promised, because it gave them even more ammunition to start a fight like they had on several other occasions. See, Jesus and his disciples, they don't have any special power after all. They can't even heal this boy. They're just men like the rest of us. Actually, less than the rest of us, because they don't even follow all the traditions like we do. They're crazy, probably possessed by evil spirits themselves. All this time that the scribes and the disciples are arguing, this boy's father is sinking further and further into despair. Not only had the disciples failed to help his boy, but they're getting into an argument with the people that are supposed to be the religious and legal experts at that time. At this point, I think he's probably regretting ever going out to look for Jesus. The boy's father didn't intend to be in the middle of some religious dispute. He came to find Jesus, but Jesus wasn't there. He wasn't where the father expected him to be. Where was he? If you go back to the beginning of this chapter, you'll see that Jesus took Peter and James and John up the mountain to observe his transfiguration. There they saw Moses and Elijah and heard the voice of God and saw Jesus in his full glory. While the father is caught in the middle of somebody else's argument in the valley, Jesus is on his way down from the mountain to meet this boy and his father. Now, it's particularly interesting to me because people usually go up a mountain to meet God. Moses went up the mountain to meet God and get the 10 Commandments. Elijah met God on the mountain. You may recall a story from 1 Kings where Elijah, he observed a windstorm and an earthquake and a fire, but God wasn't in those. He was in the gentle whisper that came at the end. Elijah observed all of those from a cave up on the mountain. People go up the mountain to meet God. But in Jesus, we have a God that's even more awesome than that. We have a God that comes down the mountain to meet us when we're in our valley. So Jesus is coming down from the mountaintop where he was revealed in the light of his glory. He comes down into the darkness of the valley, into a crowd of people arguing around a demon-possessed boy. And Jesus says, "What are you arguing about?" Any parent in the room here, you get the scenario. I can see some of you know where I'm heading. You're in the other room washing dishes or filing taxes, grown-up stuff. And you hear the kids fighting in another room. So you find them, which isn't hard to do because they're currently the loudest people in the house. And you say, what are you arguing about? But nobody wants to look you in the eye because they know they shouldn't be fighting in the first place, and they don't have an excuse. The same thing's happening here. Jesus asks his disciples and the scribes, what are you arguing about? But instead of replying, they kind of fidget their hands and look down at their feet. And finally, the boy's father speaks up. He wasn't even involved in the argument. Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute, and whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast him out, but they were not able. This man came to find Jesus, but becomes an innocent bystander in the middle of religious politics. Unfortunately, that still happens today. People come looking for Jesus, but get caught up in disagreements that take their eyes and our eyes away from the most important thing, Jesus. After hearing that his disciples couldn't cast out the demon, here's what Jesus says. And I'm actually going to quote from Matthew's gospel because he gives us just a little bit more detail here. O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear you? Bring him here to me. Who is Jesus calling faithless and perverse? The Father, the scribes, the crowd, maybe a little bit of everyone? I think he's mostly talking to his disciples. In Mark chapter 6, 3 chapters before this one, Jesus granted his disciples the authority to heal the sick and cast out demons, and they were successful at that time. But today they weren't. And why is that? The disciples actually asked Jesus that very question later in private, and Jesus tells them, this kind can only come out through prayer. That, coupled with Jesus calling them faithless and perverse, makes me think that instead of depending on God's power, as they had in the past, their former excess went to their head, and they thought, I can do this on my own. The Greek word here translated to perverse is diastrapho. Anybody in the room that actually went to Bible college, please forgive my horrible pronunciation. Diastrapho can mean distorted, twisted, or turned the wrong way. When Jesus called them perverse, he was saying that their faith was turned the wrong way. They were focused on themselves instead of on God, instead of on Jesus. Trying to do things their own way led to their failure, not only to their failure, but for a deeper and darker valley for this boy and his father. When we try to act apart from God, when we are turned the wrong way, we can end up hurting ourselves and other people in the process. After reprimanding the 9 disciples, Jesus calls for the child in question. Now, we know that this evil spirit would usually trigger a seizure when it was a dangerous place for the boy, when he was in dangerous situations near fire or water. So that way the boy would come to the most harm. But this time, it caused a seizure when the boy was nearing Jesus, because the evil spirit knew that it was at risk, it was going to do whatever it could to keep the boy away from Jesus. There is still evil in the world today, but it still trembles before Jesus. If I was Jesus, I would have healed that boy then and there, but I'm not Jesus, and everybody should be very thankful for that fact. Jesus did not heal him immediately. He turns to the Father and asks, how long has this been happening to him? But I don't think Jesus needed to know the answer to that question. I don't think it would change his healing technique. I think he knew the answer already. He already knew it on his own. This is my opinion, and some people may disagree. But when Jesus asks a question, it's for our benefit, not for his. He asks questions because the people he's talking to need to think about something. Or we, the readers, need to think about something. He already knows the answers. It's kind of like when a teacher or a therapist asks a question. They probably already know the answer. They're trying to get you to think about something. You need to think about the answer to the question, and you need to learn something. I think Jesus wanted the father to think about how he got to this point and realize how much he really needed Jesus. I think Jesus wanted this boy's father to evaluate where his faith really was at this point. The father answers Jesus from childhood, and it often casts him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. His request seems in stark contrast to some of the other stories that we've heard in this series. Back on Mother's Day, we heard from Micah about the Canaanite woman. She had a great deal of faith. She knew Jesus had the power. She was asking him to be willing to use it. And a few weeks ago, James talked about a centurion who understood how authority worked, and he recognized that Jesus already had the authority to heal his servant. And in fact, Jesus was so impressed by that centurion that he said he had more faith than anyone else he'd met in Israel. These two other people are asking for a miracle that they knew Jesus could do. They knew he could do what they needed, but they didn't know if he was going to be willing. The Father doesn't even know if Jesus can do what he asks. He says, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus responds, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately, the father of the child cries out and says, I believe, help my unbelief. This is one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible, just for this one raw, genuine moment. I believe, help my unbelief. I think all of us have probably related to that feeling at one time or another, or maybe some of you are feeling that way right now. You want to believe, but you're not all the way there yet. You're still wrestling with Jesus. You're not sure if he has your best interest in mind, or you're not sure that you really want to follow him. You're not sure if he's even real. And that's okay. God would much rather have your raw emotion and genuine questions than listen to some sort of pretend holiness. God wants to talk to the real you, not a whitewashed version of yourself. Jesus knows when you're in a valley, so you don't have to pretend to be up on a mountain. He wants to come meet you where you are right now. You just need to be honest and willing to be open. I believe, help my unbelief. That's not big faith, but it is faith in the right direction. The 9 disciples failed because they were turned in the wrong direction, but this man was turned towards Jesus, and he was taking a step in the right direction. The Father makes this declaration, I believe, help my unbelief, as a prayer, as Josh was saying earlier. That prayer, Jesus heals the boy. He rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you come out of him and never enter him again. And after crying out and convulsing terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Before he healed the boy, Jesus had told the Father, all things are possible for one who believes. Unfortunately, this passage has been misused countless of times by people, saying that God will give you whatever you want as long as you believe it hard enough. If he didn't answer your prayer the way you wanted, it must mean your faith was too small. This is false theology that downgrades God into some sort of cosmic vending machine. If God's power depended on your level of faith, Jesus would have told this father, go away and come back when you have more faith. But the size of your faith is not nearly as important as the direction of your faith. Your quality of faith is not nearly as important as who you put your faith in. After the Father said, I believe, help my unbelief, Jesus healed that boy then and there. If having enough faith were all it takes to have a wish granted, then when Jesus prayed in the garden that this cup be taken away from me, he wouldn't have gone to the cross. Who has more faith than Jesus? Or when Paul prayed that God would take away this thorn from my flesh, Paul, the apostle who wrote more books in the New Testament than anyone else, he would have been healed. But God did not answer them the way that they wanted, but he did answer them according to his plan and the way that they needed. Sometimes God answers with miracles, with healing, with problem solves. There are people in this room today by the grace of God because of answered prayer. But sometimes he answers prayer in a different way. Like when he didn't come remove the Apostle Paul's ailment. And this is Paul talking about that. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and difficulties. For when I'm weak, that's when I'm strong. You see, when you pray, Jesus removes your obstacles sometimes, but other times, he helps you climb the mountain. For the father in the story, Jesus moved his mountain. For the Apostle Paul, Jesus helped him climb the mountain. And they both grew as a result of that in different ways. The father didn't receive his miracle when he wanted it, but he did receive it when he needed it. Paul didn't receive the healing that he requested, but he did receive the strength that he needed. If you've been with us during this series, you've heard us say, whenever you encounter Jesus, something changes. The father in this story came a long way from hoping Jesus might be able to help to knowing that Jesus had the power over health and illness, life and death, angels and demons. If you choose to encounter Jesus, you can be changed too if you're willing to have a little bit of faith. Jesus asked this father to do a little self-reflection, and I would ask the same of you. Who do you identify most with in this story? The father looking for help, trying to figure out if Jesus is the answer. The 9 disciples following Jesus. They had been following him for a while, but maybe they needed to take some time to refocus. Maybe one of the 3 disciples having a mountaintop experience with Jesus. Or even maybe one of the scribes just looking for a way to discredit Jesus. No matter where you place yourself, any one of those categories and everything else in between, you can still say the same prayer. I believe, help my unbelief. I'm not so sure about this whole Jesus thing, but part of me wants to believe, help my unbelief. I don't know how I'm going to overcome my current difficulty, but you said that you will work all things out for my good. I believe. Help my unbelief. Jesus, I have been following you for a while, but I haven't had enough faith to submit this one part of my life to you. I haven't followed your will with my time, or maybe with my relationships, or my finances, or forgiving that one person that hurt me that one time. But I want to believe that you know what's best. I believe. Help my unbelief. And if you would like somebody to help you start that process, somebody from our prayer team would love to pray with you after the service. Whether you're feeling on top of the mountain or down in the valley, Jesus wants to meet you there, wherever you are. And if you're willing to put a little faith in the right direction, he's going to help you move it, or he's going to help you climb the mountain. This series is focused on encounters that different people had with Jesus. Last week, James explained that communion was one of the ways that we could encounter Jesus. Communion gives us time to connect and to reflect on Jesus as what he's done for us, the mountains that he has moved or helped us climb. And he moved our biggest mountain with his work upon the cross. So if you would take the bread and the juice. Jesus, thank you for saving us from ourselves. Thank you for moving our mountains and for helping us to climb mountains and knowing which one we really need. Jesus, we believe. Help our unbelief. Amen.